I'm actually really engaged in this book. I'm really enjoying it. It is just the kind of thing I'm looking for when it comes to wanting to understand the politics of the past. Hi, I'm Josh and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be reading, reviewing, and giving commentary on The Black Cabinet, the untold story of African Americans in politics during the age of Roosevelt by Jill Watts. This was a book that was granted to me by NetGalley. It is set to be published May 12th, 2020, and in fact it is May 17th, so set is not the right word because it has been published. What you can expect in this video is just me updating you as I'm reading every time I have some thoughts. This isn't going to be a vlog in the traditional sense. I'm not going to be showing you what I'm doing while I read. But I do feel like this is the perfect type of book that lends to being discussed, right? And so that's what this video is. It's going to be a discussion video with a review, given that it is a nonfiction book. It's not really a matter of spoiling it. It's just a matter of analyzing the history, which is something that I love doing, apparently. I honestly don't know what to expect from this book. I requested it and it was granted. Now that it is out, I did go ahead and buy the audiobook because I feel like it'll definitely help me get through it faster and enjoy it more. The narrator, I know I've heard her before and she's really good. So I'm hoping it's an enjoyable experience. It's about 20 hours, so it's going to be about 10 hours at double speed. Okay, so now getting into the actual story. It really starts at the time of the Reconstruction and understanding how the point of Reconstruction was to put a rein on the South, to force them to give Black Americans equal rights and prevent racially targeted attacks. Unfortunately, that became difficult for the Republican Party, and the Republican Party decided to give the South free rein, which basically gave way to the Jim Crow era. And they basically realized they can keep the black vote without having to do too much, or as much as they should, basically. When the president dies, Theodore Roosevelt takes over for him. This is the cousin of Franklin Roosevelt, who is the husband of Eleanor. So two different Roosevelts here. And while this is the same time we start to see people in positions of power, he still is not fighting very hard. Theodore Roosevelt is not fighting hard to do much. There was one point where he refuses to send in troops when a white mob attacks African Americans in the South, and then he won't even speak out against it. In fact, he ends up speaking out against Black Americans, blaming them for inciting white Americans who were just trying to protect the innocence of their women, or some racist and sexist simultaneously shit. Which is ironic because if you Google Theodore Roosevelt, or if you know history better than I do, you might know that he is regarded as one of the best presidents, which is a very white-centric view, I think, based off of this. But yeah, that's where we're at right now. We have a president who wasn't elected, who doesn't want to do anything, who is fine with the status quo and expects blacks to stay in their place. Luckily, we still see Black Americans beginning to take power, beginning to have sway. Booker T. Washington gets an important post in Washington, D.C. I don't remember what it was called. I didn't quite understand what it was. That we're getting so many names thrown at us, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not retaining all of them. Overall, I think she's doing a good job, the author, at sort of conveying an overall narrative. Right now I'm engaged and enjoying it, and I feel like I'm following along well enough. Okay, so after Roosevelt comes Taft, the other Republican, another Republican. So I think I get a little confused. It was before Roosevelt that the Black Cabinet started to form, and it was officially in 1908 that it became informally recognized as the Black Cabinet. However, the people in office under Roosevelt began to decrease. That number got even smaller under Taft. And so you can imagine how Black Americans might become disenfranchised with Taft, along with his other approaches to things. They were very hesitant to support a Democratic alternative. Being from the South, the way they saw it was, how could they be any worse than the presidents we already have? And so they supported Wilson. In comes Wilson. Washington becomes highly segregated. He removes a lot of the Black Cabinet, just not looking great. In either case, we see that Black Americans are playing an active part in this process. And in fact, it was Washington who tried to push for the re-election of Taft because he felt like that was their best option. It was the head of the NAACP, I believe, W.E.B. Du Bois, who actively pushed for Wilson. And that's when we sort of saw Wilson come in. That's where I'm at right now. Things are looking kind of grim. At the same time, it was clear that the Republicans weren't acting. We're starting to see sort of the shift of Democratic support, Black supporters, over to Democrats. I guess if I had to make a prediction, seeing as the Democratic Party still has a majority of the Black vote, I expect that the Democratic Party is going to start shifting left, right? First things first, I am embarrassed, but I was so wrong in so many ways. Exactly what I said, the complete opposite happened. But before I get into what happened after I left you, let me clarify, I made a mistake. Woodrow Wilson, he won not because the black vote went to Democrats, which might have been part of it, but it was because there was a third party candidate that split the vote. It wasn't until FDR, the other Roosevelt, came into being that a candidate arguably got elected because of the black vote. But even then, they make a point to recognize that his election, the data isn't entirely clear. What mattered was the rhetoric that suggested he won because of the black vote. That is what gave them that power to sort of use that to get back control. So let's be clear. The black cabinet is disbarred. It's basically gone by 1918, which is around the time of that Booker T. Washington died. As they fight to try and get people back in there, it doesn't happen. Woodrow Wilson is not doing anything. Taft didn't do anything. Then a couple people afterwards, people I don't remember their names, they're forgettable presidents, they didn't do anything to help. If anything, they only did harmful things. And it is what fueled this move to break away from party lines, basically, and do the good for the nation, basically, making them recognize that if we want change, we have to act. We have to make a decision and go with the people who are willing to help us, which even then, I'm not convinced the Democrats were. Call it my white naivete that I haven't figured this out already, but becoming abundantly clear that it isn't any one party that's doing this change. Every party will do the bare minimum until they're forced to do otherwise. It is not the Democrat Party that made change. It was ambitious, motivated black Americans who pushed for change to make it happen. And that's what matters here, is the story of this black cabinet or the people outside the cabinet to get the cabinet reestablished. They're the ones who made this happen. By the time we get to FDR, he still doesn't quite want to do much. He is convinced to add someone to the cabinet, but of course that's not enough, so they fight for more. But the point is we start to see the reestablishment of this cabinet. It got disbanded, but black Americans aren't really his focus. He's focused on the New Deal, which is arguably ignoring African Americans. And the more and more I study history, from the 1900s, from the Civil War up to now even, it's becoming very apparent just how pervasive these problems are. It becomes harder and harder to ignore or reject this idea that there isn't and hasn't always been a pervasive power pushing back against equality in black Americans. There is still so much inequality happening, made evident by the cases that are affecting black Americans from COVID, to what the police do when a white person will shoot someone who's out on a run. What astounds me is that so many people want to say that you should be fighting for equality for all, not the equality for one group. Sorry, I'm cooking. I'm a very messy cooker. What people don't seem to realize is that the equality for all is only gotten when you force people to recognize the inequality of one. We have to focus on those that are being attacked if we ever want to reach equality. It's not enough to want equality when you are too blind to recognize that there's more to equality than your needs. And by you, I'm talking about basically white Americans. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going. I'm still very much enjoying the book. This is a great history lesson. It's a lot of fun. Still a lot of names that I'm not really catching, for better or worse. Okay, I'm not sure where I left you off last time. I think it was talking about the current state going into Roosevelt. Roosevelt started this division specifically created to focus on African American economic issues. Technically, it sounded like it was his interior treasurer who did it. Unfortunately, by the way, treasurer himself ended up going around the NAACP, who they took recommendations from for the post, if I understood correctly, ended up just picking someone entirely different, a white man instead. Now, the white man, Clark Foreman, I'm trying really hard to learn the names, seems to be trying to prove himself as someone who actually cares. It is at least a positive step forward. He hires a black woman secretary, which gets a lot of pushback. The problem is that they're still very hesitant about him because he's from Georgia. He used to be very associated racist, but it seems to be like he's actually trying to make a difference. And if I understood correctly, he pushed to get Robert Weaver. The author here spends some time earlier in the book guiding us through his path, as he is the first black man to get a PhD in economics from Harvard. He is now getting this job. This book is very heavy in names. I don't have the physical copy, so I can't say for sure, but I'd imagine this type of book would do very well to have a log of all the characters or people, significant characters mentioned in the back. Part of the reason why I wish I had a physical copy. Just know that if you're listening like I am without any context, it's very hard to follow along. What I'm thinking is I'm just going to keep doing this, do my best to follow along, and this might be something I want to return to because it's still very interesting and engaging. The discussion is very politics oriented, and if that's something you're into, then I think you'll like this, because it's something I definitely love. I love politics, and I'm living for the politics of this whole story. I'm about to go to bed. I actually took off my shirt, so I have a new shirt on. I will see you tomorrow. I probably have 15.5 hours left. I want to finish this tomorrow in at 2.25 speed. We're probably looking at less than 7 hours, which was feasible. I could work tomorrow, which my advisor said we don't have to, and still be able to finish it. But I also want to spend tomorrow night reading another book. This isn't a vlog. What am I doing? So I'm enjoying it, but I'm a little lost. Part of that might be the audiobook. Okay, it's the next day. I did a bit more reading last night before I went to bed. Right now, I'm about 30% through the book. Got about 6 hours left. I slept in, then I did a bit of work, even though it's technically a holiday. But I got through it pretty quick because I was motivated to get back to this book, which I think says a lot. I'm actually really engaged in this book. I'm really enjoying it. It is just the kind of thing I'm looking for when it comes to wanting to understand the politics of the past. It feels like I'm learning about the issues of today, which of course these issues do influence today, and it sort of reflects some of the things that are going on today. But it's more the method in which it's being told, as if it's this political narrative of how things are evolving, as if I'm actually there. It's a lot of fun, if emotionally exhausting and infuriating at times. So a few updates. After reading a review or two on Goodreads, I realized the focus of this book is going to be, it is in fact, around 5 or 6 key figures in the Black Cabinet. We've met at least 2 of them. I think we're meeting the 3rd one now where I'm at. One reviewer by the name of Raymond went in detail talking about the book, but he talks about how it's focused on Mary McLeod Bethune, and she is the name that I do remember hearing first, like in the very introduction, but he talks about her, so that name I recognize. What I don't remember are these other 5 names, which are apparently becoming important. Robert Reaver, Bill Hasty, Al Smith, and Robert Van. At this point, after reading those names, I keep recognizing Robert Reaver is probably the only one that I remember hearing before I read this review. And while you might be saying, Josh, you should be able to figure this out on your own, personally, I kind of wish she had set it up a bit more on who we should be focusing on in the introduction. Like, sure, she gives us Roosevelt and she gives us Bethune, but I would have liked a bit more outline or introduction to this idea that these are the main figures we'll be focusing on. Because otherwise, when we're getting so many names in history, how the hell am I supposed to know who I'm supposed to retain? You can't expect me to retain every name. So that's probably the one complaint I have here. And if you're interested in reading the book, now you know these are the 5 key figures to try and focus your attention on. Personally, as someone who has trouble remembering so many different people, I need this kind of focus. So now I get that we have Mary Bethune and Robert Reaver, and I'm beginning to see how Al Smith and, damn it, Bill Hasty and Robert Van are coming into play. I'm really bad with names. I can remember roles that certain figures have and the things they do, but the names that go along with them are really hard for me to retain. With that in mind, I'm hoping I can keep my focus a bit more moving forward, and I can definitely see how we're leading up to all this stuff. All that said, let's give a little bit more context about the story. The impression I'm getting right now is that Roosevelt wasn't actively fighting against the Black Cabinet's movements. However, he wasn't actively supporting it either. The problem, it seems to be, is that there were plenty of people in his cabinet, in his administration, who were actively fighting against it, either by the excuse of it being unnecessary, wanting to ignore the plight of the African American community, or to call it unavoidable, which are 2 things that I think are definite red flags if you think about some of the rhetoric being spread today against attempts to, again, continue this improvement of people's lives and ensurement of their rights not being infringed. Clark Foreman seems to be probably the only person not in the African American community who is actually actively putting themselves at risk, fighting to help this cause. He's been given this position of authority, and for better or worse, he's using it to try and encourage Black Americans to get a voice, a place in the government. And so that seems to be a role that has been really important here. Other than that, this is becoming overly clear that this battle for equal rights is entirely on the shoulders of Black Americans. It wasn't Roosevelt who fought for this, it was Black Americans. Anything that Roosevelt, or even those that came after, did, it was because of the work these people are doing. And I find that just very inspiring. The goal here is to prove that the Black community is actually suffering, and then get the president to hear. Because right now, we've gotten to the point where we finally have some government documents that are acknowledging and proving that African Americans are in fact suffering and being discriminated against. Problem is that it's not yet getting to the desk of the president. So we'll see if that happens. Personally, I'm hoping it happens. In either case, I'm enjoying the ride. So as we move forward, the Black Cabinet is at this point semi-recognized, at least informally, but they're still not a cohesive force. In fact, they've split off into almost different fractions. We have Walbert Reaver on the one side, now in the position of Clark Foreman, who pushed to have him replace him. And in another opposing branch of government, we have Al Smith. They talk about how these two factions tend to push back against each other, even though they both want the same cause. I mean, right now, as we talk, I can't quite tell you what the difference in their positions are. I feel like I should know that after reading what I just read, basically outlining what the two did. But like, while I can see the bigger picture, I can't recollect in detail what it is exactly that the two are doing. It's been raining all day, all weekend really, and looks like it might have lightened up just a bit. So it might be just enough for me to go for a bike ride. Okay, I'm about to go for my bike ride, but I figured it'd be a good time to give you a brief update. So what we've moved on to is Mary Bethune has befriended Eleanor Roosevelt. That is how she has worked her way into the Roosevelt camp. Now, to be clear, she spent her entire life pushing to learn and to play an active part in the progression of equal rights and inequality. That is how she ends up getting the ear of Eleanor Roosevelt. Together they begin to break boundaries. It eventually ends up getting Bethune a role in the White House administration. What matters is that she's here now. She's a part of this Black Cabinet of sorts. The problem is the Black Cabinet still isn't doing anything. Let me rephrase that. They're not doing anything as a force. They are fractured. Bethune is the one to bring them together. She is the mother to guide them. And where we're leaving off is she is basically going to lead them, or has urged them to work together for this cause, to recognize they have to stick together. See you next time. So I'm back to my bike ride. So Mary Bethune was taking the reins, and she seemed to have the ability to guide and lead this group, to get them to work together rather than work at odds with each other. As time passes, they try to make things change, and some things do improve. Unemployment goes down for Black Americans, and some funding gets attributed properly as well. Of course, there's always more to get done. In all of this, Roosevelt is still maintaining his lack of action. We reach a point where it seems that Bethune's ability to guide the Black Cabinet is falling apart. People are resigning, people are dying. The end of Roosevelt's second term is coming about. World War II is coming around, and there's a question, is he going to run again? What's going to happen? What should the Black Cabinet be supporting? Who should they be supporting? And can they maintain their strength, their solidarity? It seems the answer is no. And that's pretty much where we are at. I'm still enjoying it. I'm not sure how to rate the quality of the book as a matter of how accessible it is, because as a listener, I've already said that I'm not retaining everything. I feel like I'm getting the big picture here, but when I'm sitting here trying to discuss it, there's only so much I can say. For the studious reader, it will be a fantastic book. For the less studious reader, it will be harder to retain everything. That said, I have read a few academic books, and I don't know if you'd classify this as academic, but even if you did, I still think it is amazingly engaging. The narrative that Watts, the author, is crafting here is very engrossing and fascinating. While I may not be retaining everything I hear, it's still a really interesting story that is very captivating. I think it's a solid book for sure. And really, I don't have to remember details as long as I remember the bigger picture of these people who had this significant role and the truth about Roosevelt's role in this process. So I'm gonna keep listening. I have 6 hours of raw audiobook left, less than 3 hours at double speed. Part of me wants to postpone it till tomorrow and watch a movie. I'm not gonna do that just yet. I'm going to keep listening for a bit. I would like to get this video up on Wednesday since it's already late, right? But we'll see if that actually happens. So Roosevelt's third re-election is upon us. It's approaching. The Black Cabinet is losing sway. Well, as things progress, there is a threat of a march on Washington. And in an attempt to alleviate concerns, Roosevelt agrees to make an executive order preventing federal discrimination in hiring or through federal defense contracts. And he also gives a position in the military to a Black American, essentially as an advisory role. However, he still refuses to end segregation in the military. Nevertheless, this is enough to get him reelected. After doing this order, he doesn't really give clear instructions on how it's supposed to be enforced. And the team that is in charge of looking over the discriminatory hiring is basically led by a team of white policymakers. So tensions continue to rise. Mary Bethune continues to fight for Roosevelt, even though she might not entirely like the things he's doing. She still recognizes that he's probably her best bet, their best bet, getting progress. The problem is new figures are coming into the Black cabinet and they don't trust Bethune as much as past members did. And so it's making their ability to control things and to push as a cohesive force, it's making it difficult. The further along we get, the more muddled I become in the details. And I don't know if that's because of I'm reading it in a day or if it's because of the book. Honestly, I don't think I would be retaining much more, regardless of how fast I'm reading it, unless I was taking aggressive notes along the way. And it's just not something I'm interested in doing while I'm reading. But I'm still enjoying it. Right now it's 10 o'clock. I don't know if I'm going to finish this tonight, but I'm going to get close to finishing. Okay. Okay, I have maybe half an hour left to listen to, but it's almost 1 and I'm gonna go to bed. A final update before I listen to the last bit. Where we left off was they were trying to get African Americans to fight alongside white Americans in the military. That never happened. In fact, in the attempt to make that happen, things became more and more disheveled. The Black cabinet is becoming more and more weaker, and the members of the cabinet are becoming more and more disenfranchised. Bill Hayes, he resigns from his position. Soon after, we eventually see Mary Bethune's department completely defunded, shut down. So what she had been doing all this time was leading this sector of the government to teach and prepare young African Americans for various trade jobs. And essentially what is happening is the reason these issues, these Black cabinet issues, are getting more and more disregarded is because of the war. The war is being used as an excuse to basically defund them, to make them a secondary issue, as if they're a distraction. It's really disheartening, honestly. Everything that's going on, it's hard to excuse it away when it comes to the actions of Roosevelt. His wife seems to be fighting. She appears to be pushing him to do the right thing, but he is not listening. It's as if he doesn't care. It's not his issue. And really, it's just a matter of him letting lower figures, who are the ones wanting to do this, because he's afraid of losing power. So it seems as if we're approaching the end of the Black cabinet. It is still clear that we have this group of people who have been fighting for their entire life to improve the lives of African Americans, despite constant pushback. It's disheartening because not a lot has happened. They achieved some things, but as things began to die down, it feels like most of the story is about battles that really don't lead to many successes. Of course, it's hard to assess how bad things would be without them, because you have basically the administration doing the bare minimum to get by. At the very least, is more than ignoring them altogether. I'm still really enjoying it. I was thinking about the way the story is being told and why it is that this works for me. I still think this kind of story could end up being kind of dull. It's a matter of making it relevant and making it a compelling story. At least as someone who is interested in politics today, I consume modern politics ferociously. Key, I think, to telling this political story of the past is to put us in their shoes, to help us understand their point of view so that we can share in their motivation and their desires, and seemingly help us understand the acts of the quote-unquote villains in this story, right? I'm gonna go to bed. So I just woke up. I spent half an hour in bed staring at a wall in the dark while I listened to the last part of this audiobook, because it's just that good, okay? It was great. Where did I leave you off? The Black cabinet was falling apart. Bethune's department was defunded. She was trying to get a job. I think she ended up getting a job before she died eventually. That ended up happening, I believe, after FDR died. What seems to be interesting is that once he died, it really rewrote history. So a lot of their success can attributed to FDR as if FDR was the one who created this group, or rather who got the advice from the group, when in reality the group actively fought against them, and at times he was antagonistic. And while the story can be really disheartening, it's important to recognize that there were several improvements for the black community. And more importantly than that, these figures became icons in the community, in the country. They played important roles. Robert Reaver, he was moved around a lot before he quit, but he ended up quitting out of anger. But he ended up getting another job eventually. Let's see, after FDR died, Harry Truman, he didn't actually, to everyone's surprise, get rid of a lot of the black cabinet. And in fact, I believe he passed an executive order making the military desegregated. A lot of these actions you could see sort of, I think, paying off. So as FDR dies, Truman does a few surprising things. Of course, he loses re-election to Eisenhower, at which point Watts describes the civil rights progress coming to a standstill. People in the black cabinet, I believe, end up losing their job for the most part, and little happens, which I think really solidifies sort of this distinction between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as far as caring about black Americans. Eventually, of course, we get to JFK, who begins to push some new legislation. Lyndon B. Johnson does end up pushing it through, and it's important to remember, although I haven't mentioned it to you, that Johnson knew at times Bethune, and there was a relationship there. I think it's hard to quantify exactly how much of that relationship impacted him in his decision making, because obviously he was the one who nominated Thurgood Marshall, the first black man on the Supreme Court, also was the one who ended up being president that signed the Civil Rights Act. And also the people like MLK, they were inspired by people like Weaver or Bethune. Many of them actually ended up living into the 80s, at least Weaver and I think Hasty. I was gonna save my final thoughts on this, but I kind of want to talk about it now, even though I look dead, because I did just wake up. I remember learning so much about, obviously, Lincoln's part in the emancipation of the slaves, and then of course we have the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I don't know if this is me and my privilege just not considering the black cabinet in the FDR time as worth remembering, or if it is the education system in the South, but I have no memory of learning about this part of the history of the United States and progression of equality. I think it's just amazing that this huge step in progress of civil rights has been, at least for me, completely unacknowledged. And I'm just amazed that I could live so long, 30 years, without realizing this aspect of history and people, the actions they did, and the importance that they played in this process. Overall, I really loved this book, and while I do fear I didn't retain as much as I would have liked, I did get some big picture stuff, but it was also really engaging and really fun to read. And I think most importantly in all of this, I'm leaving it really excited about politics and learning more about history. Like, I just bought 2 volumes of an Eleanor Roosevelt autobiographies. It's like I have this urge to read more history, nonfiction, particularly in politics. And this book definitely contributed to that. And she really highlights how political nonfiction can be really compelling if done the right way. And I really applaud Watts for doing that. I'm really appreciative of getting the arc by NetGalley, even if I ended up reading it late on Audible. I'm happy this happened. I'm very happy I read this book. I wasn't sure what to expect coming into this, because sometimes there can be some fringe books on NetGalley. And this is definitely one that I feel like had a lot to say. And it was also said really well. So I'm very happy I read it. I'm gonna give it 4.5 out of 5 stars, even though I was thinking 4, but I think 4.5 really is deserved, because the content is there, even if my personal experience was not retaining it. And also, like I said, it was just so engaging and just so much fun and exciting to read. But as always, I hope you stay safe, and I hope to see you next time. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button below, and if you want to see more from me, push subscribe. I read more than just history and political nonfiction. I read a lot of different things, but I would definitely be reading more nonfiction. That's what you're interested in watching, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see more of that, or just see more of me in general. And my okay, bye.